What is the difference between platform UAA and XSUAA? To recap, platform UAA is for the platform users, which is developers and administrators, to log into your BTP sub account, and XSUAA is meant for business users to log into your applications. The next thing that we saw was the structure of security artifacts on BTP. So in your application, you will take care of all these artifacts to make sure that proper authentication and authorization mechanism are covered. So a user is assigned with a role collection. A role collection can have many roles, and a role is based on a template, right? And a template can have multiple scopes as well as multiple attributes. Okay. The next thing that we did was we saw what is JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, the full form, and how is it different from XML. Okay, so JSON, like we covered yesterday, is a method of data interchange. This is machine readable format. It's also a human readable format. It is concise as compared to XML. XML is more verbose, has more characters to show or pass on the same message, while JSON has lesser number of characters. Okay, and we did a small hands-on exercise where we all created a JSON file for us, given some table in the database. Next, we saw the xs-security.json file, which we were covering yesterday. Okay, at this point, we left the yesterday's session and I'll pick it up from there only. So before I go ahead with that, do you guys have any questions regarding what we covered yesterday? All right, looks like no. I'll go ahead then. So yesterday in xs-security.json, we covered XS app name, the scopes, what is meant by a scope, how we can deal with scopes in our applications, and then attributes. Okay, now I'll talk about role templates. Now, role templates are something which you define as an application developer based on your business requirements or based on the kind of functionality that you are trying to implement in your application. Okay. In this particular example that I'm showing here, this is an example of an app where we want to read some details. Okay, some employee details. This is probably something which you can relate to your HR functions. Okay, so a company HR who wants to read some employee information can use this kind of a security structure, wherein we have created three templates here. One is called a USA reader, another one is called Singapore reader, and the third one is called a global reader. And the fourth one also is called an admin, which we just created just for the sake of administrating your application. Okay, now the name here signifies which country this reader belongs to, or this which country this reader can read the data from. Okay, now the scope is read, meaning this person can read. Okay, so that takes care of some part of your functionality wherein it tells us what this user can do. Okay, attributes here are something which is telling me, again based on my business logic in my application, which country this person can read data for. Okay, so what I've done is I've created a role template here, name of the role template, description of the role template, just to let everyone know what this role will do. Scope references, this tells me what this person will do. Attribute references again is something which tells what this person can do in greater detail. Okay, now these role template, once I execute my xs-security.json file for the application, this role template will in turn create roles inside my BTP cockpit. and those rows I can club into my role collections and assign those role collections to my users. Okay. Similarly, I have created another role template called Singapore Reader, which says that this person can read data of Singapore users. Everything is same as compared to USA Reader, just the attribute name country has a different value. Instead of USA, it's called Singapore, which signifies that this person can read all the data only for the Singapore employees. Okay. The next thing is your global reader. Here, the scope remains the same. Okay, we still want this person to read data, but we are not defining any attribute reference. So the logic that we might have written in our application states that this person can read everything. Okay, I could have easily maintained a scope reference like this. I could have also said attribute reference country instead of Singapore. I might have said all. Okay, this again is based on your business logic that you have implemented in your application. So earlier, when we did not have any attribute references, right? Let me comment it out. So earlier, when we did not have anything of this sort, then in our logic, we would have checked the attribute references of that person. If we did not find any attribute references, then we will simply allow them to read everything. Or in the other case, if we have attribute reference where country is equal to all, then we say if the country is equal to all, then we allow them to read all the details. Okay, like I said, totally dependent on your business logic. Okay, admin now, admin can do both read and perform. Okay, one thing that you might notice here is in earlier attributes here, Singapore, all, USA, I'm providing default values. Okay, these default values are tied to my role. So as soon as I assign the USA reader role to someone, okay, this attribute country, I'm defaulting it to USA. As soon as I assign the role Singapore reader to someone, I'm defaulting the country to Singapore. But in case of admin, I'm not defaulting the department attribute to anything. So I'm expecting this department name, or sorry, the value of department attribute to come from my identity provider, IDP. Okay. So consider that you have your user master records in Azure AD. You have your first name, last name, email ID, your department, your manager's ID, uh, your employee ID, all those things, location, etc. Right? All those things I can get from my identity provider and get it passed in my application. So in my application, I will simply go and fetch the value of this department. I might also write some logic where I can say if the department is equal to IT department, then let them do something else. If the department is equal to your finance department, let them do something else. Okay, that kind of logic I can write. So I'm not hard coding the value of department here. I'm simply fetching this value from the user master record. Okay. Next thing is role collections. Now, inside your xs-security.json file, you can also create role collections. Okay, so as soon as I execute this file for my application, these role collections also will be visible to you inside your BTP cockpit. Okay, again, these will not be assigned to any user from here, that you anyways have to do from your cockpit or from your CLI. Okay, we are simply saying uh, that create a role collection called training viewer and assign them the role template called reader. Okay, another role collection I can create training admin, assign them the role template called admin. Another I am creating training admin key user, so I will assign them reader and admin both. Okay, this is something which I can do within my xs-security.json file. Okay, although this is an optional thing, you can easily do this thing instead of doing it here. You can always do it from your BTP cockpit. Another thing is your OAuth 2 configuration. Okay, I'll talk about OAuth 2 after completing this file. So this will make more sense when we cover that portion of the training. So every OAuth token will have some validity. Okay, so we have something called access tokens. Okay, those have some validity. So consider this: you will be using some mobile applications here on your mobile phone, and many times, for example, I've seen this happening with Paytm more often than not, where I have logged into Paytm, but after a certain period of time, I think after a week or so, I automatically get logged out. Okay, so in that case, what these guys have done, the Paytm guys, they have set the token validity to 1 week. Okay, here in case of BTP, we give the token validity in seconds. So the minimum here is 5 minutes, which is 300 seconds, and the maximum I can do is your 8 nines, which is close to your 3 years. Okay, so that again depends on the kind of security architecture you want to follow or security best practices you want to follow or your client follows. If they say that I want my users to log in again and again every day, they want to log in, so I can probably keep my token validity as 24 hours. But if they say that I'm okay if people log in once and they don't have to log in for another year, that's also okay. So I can accordingly adjust my token validity period here. Okay. Redirect URI. The next thing is redirect URI. For now, just remember that there is an option to configure redirect URIs here. I'll come back to this thing once I talk to you guys about OAuth and the flows of OAuth. Okay. Then we will talk about the significance of configuring redirect URIs here. Okay. Now, before I move on to OAuth now, any questions from anyone in xs-security.json file? Okay, so far we are just doing a theory walkthrough of xs-security.json. We are not using it anywhere. We will use it once we start deploying our Node.js applications. Okay, we will use this thing extensively. We will deploy this. We will create our authentication authorization mechanisms. We will see how this works in reality. But from a theory standpoint, if you guys have any question, please let me know. Okay, looks like there are no questions. I'll go ahead. Okay, now let's talk about OAuth. OAuth is a very important topic which all of you need to understand completely since you are going to be developing applications on BTP. This is how you enable authorization in your applications. Okay, this is how authorization on BTP works. Now, OAuth is an authorization protocol. Okay, this means that the users delegate their authorization to the apps they are trying to access. Okay. OAuth works with mobile applications, browser-based applications, server-to-server communications, IoT devices, everything. Okay, so in case you are building a scenario or an application using IoT devices, where you have lots of IoT devices deployed on client side, and you want to get data from them, and you want those IoT devices to communicate with your BTP application, the server, then you will need OAuth to come into play. Okay, I'll talk about more scenarios on OAuth in the next slide. What those scenarios are, how we work with them. We will cover two specific flows of OAuth which are used primarily everywhere. Okay, in two different scenarios. But before that, it is important to understand the roles of OAuth. There are four types of um, objects or artifacts when it comes to OAuth. Okay, the first is the resource owner, meaning the person who is trying to access a particular resource or a particular API. Okay, someone who needs access basically. Okay, another thing is your client. Now client itself can be anything. Okay, so earlier when we defined clients in the client server architecture, when we defined client, we said that it can be a web browser. Okay, but the definition of client is a bit broader than only web browser. The clients also cover your mobile applications. The clients can also cover your IoT devices. Okay, essentially any system or any application which is requesting for a resource is called a client. Okay, now think about server to server communication. In case where I need, for example, I need my BTP application to fetch some data from your SuccessFactors server, right? In that case, I have a server on BTP and then I have my SuccessFactors server. So that will be an example of server to server communication. Now, since my BTP server is asking for some information from my SuccessFactors server, in this scenario, my BTP server is called a client. Okay, so to reiterate, client is an application which is asking for some information from some other application. So the application which is asking for information is client, and the application which is providing that information is the server. Okay, so that is the complete technical definition of what a client is and what a server is. Okay, it's a bit broader than what we spoke about earlier. Okay, before I move on, any questions regarding client here? Because it is utmost essential to understand client is not just what you can see. Client can be anything who is asking for some information. Okay. Next thing is your authorization server. Okay, this is where XSUAA comes into play. Now, authorization server is uh, there to first of all validate your credentials. As a user, you will uh, pass on your user ID and password, your credentials, right, to log into some application. So XSUAA will validate those credentials, and depending on the kind of flow that you are targeting from OAuth, you will get an access token, and then that access token you can use from client and get access to the resources or information on server. Server will also talk to the XSUAA auth server to validate that access token. Okay, and I'll talk about uh, this kind of a flow in detail. Okay, in the next or the slide after that. Okay, then is your resource server. This is very simple. This is the one piece of software which is having the information which the user is looking for. Okay, so in case of, let's say, your Gmail server, so Gmail has that information which is your emails, right? So in case of Gmail, your Gmail server will be your resource server because it has the information you are looking for. Okay, in our case, we will create a node application which will serve as a resource server for us. Okay, now before I move on, like I said, it is very important to understand these four rows of OAuth. Please read through the slide once more. Let me know if you have any doubts or any confusion here. Then I'll go and talk about the flow of the four flows of OAuth. Okay, looks like we are good with this. Now the next thing, we will cover are the flows of OAuth. Okay, we have four flows of OAuth. Okay, authorization code flow, implicit grant flow, client credentials flow, and password grant flow. Okay, I will talk about these flows right now in detail. You will not be required to remember each and everything about all these four flows. Okay, once you implement it in your application, it should be pretty simple enough for you to follow. You should be pretty confident on this. Once you do this, the two most important flows here are authorization code flow and the client credentials flow, which I will detail out in the next slides. Okay, but for now, I'll talk about all these four flows. Okay, so talk about the authorization code flow first. This is the most important, most widely used flow of OAuth that you will see working in your day-to-day life. Okay, uh, as an example, you will find if you log into some mobile applications, as an example, Amazon or some other applications which requires login, or which provides us a feature of social login. For example, you can log in with your Google credentials or your Facebook credentials, right? In those cases, your application is essentially following your auth code flow. Okay, now in case of auth code flow, we need a front end. So since you are going to be the developers, you you will be required to create a front end. You will be required to have a backend which you will create. It needs a user's interaction. Okay, the user, for example, any business user will be required to interact with your system, and there is something called a client secret. Okay, I'll talk about this in a bit. So there is something called a client secret which is also required in case of auth code flow. So the four criterias of OAuth flows are front end, back end, user interaction, and need of client secret. In case of auth code flow, all these four are required. Hence, this is the most secure, at the same time most complex auth flow to implement. Okay, it is most complex, but at the same time it is very, very secure. Okay, when it comes to your applications. All right, now talking about client secret. So you, as a user, you have your own user ID and passwords. All right, but when it comes to your applications, okay, since we learned that OAuth is an authorization protocol wherein you as a user are giving those rights to an application to act on your behalf, okay, to access resources on your behalf. How does the OAuth server, okay, in our case, which that is XSUAA, how does an OAuth server know that this request is coming from an authorized application or from a proper application? How do they know if someone is not faking it or someone has not hacked it? Okay, how does it know that it's a proper application which is asking me for an access token, right? In that case, the XSUAA server, the auth server, will provide your application with a client secret. Okay, this client secret is considered as important or as uh, sensitive as your passwords. So once you get a client secret from some application, right, don't uh, try to divulge it to too many people. Treat it as your password basically, okay? Because using that client secret, people can access your information. Right. So this client secret is very important piece of information, sensitive and important. Now, talking about implicit grant. Okay, actually no. Before I go on, any questions on authorization code flow here? Okay, I'll detail it exactly what all steps are involved and how it works. There are some 12, 13 steps involved in this flow. I'll detail those in the next slide. But for now, whatever we have spoken about, any questions regarding auth code flow? Guys, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so okay, then I'll consider there are no questions here. Okay, talking about implicit grant. Now, implicit grant is something which we used to use in very early days of OAuth. Okay, it's there because we had this thing done very early in OAuth days. It's just there for backward compatibility. Okay, but it is not secure at all. Okay, the first reason being it doesn't need a client secret. That means any application can get access to your information easily if your application is using implicit grant. Okay, it was meant for applications which don't have any backend. Okay, so that's why it needs backend is crosshair. Okay, it's not required. So consider a scenario where you only have a front end application, a simple static web app that we just deployed right some last week. So consider that all you have is your static web server, static files, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you need access to some resources. Okay, typically we should do all our API calls, all our sensitive API calls from backend, not from frontend. But we have seen some cases where we allow direct access to our database layer from our frontend, which is a bad design at least. Okay, in that case, in those cases, we might use implicit grant. Okay, here we don't need a backend because we are simply using everything on our front end. We can simply call from our front end our database layer. As an example, people who might have worked with the XSJS layer. Is there anyone on this call who has worked with HANA and XSJS XSO data?
No, sir.
Okay, I'll elaborate that a bit. So when we start working on HANA, SAP HANA database, SAP HANA is not just a database, it has an application layer or a service layer as well. So what SAP has done, SAP has built a database, and on top of that, they have also built an application, a service layer. Okay, let me actually, yeah, okay. Now, what they have done is they had a database, okay, HANA DB, which is normal, simple relational DB, okay. Now, what they did was they went ahead and created an application or a service layer on top of this HANA DB. Okay, which in earlier times we used to call it XS Classic. Okay, now we know it as XS Advanced. Okay, just a sec. Okay, so this is what they did. What it means is, and this service layer exposes two types of technologies to us. One is your XSJS. We can write XSJS, or we can write XS OData. You guys would have worked with OData, right?
Yes, work with OData. Yeah.
Awesome. So what basically this service layer does is it gives you a feature that you can use XSJS and XSO data directly. Okay, that means just a sec. Yeah. And then is your front end. Yeah. Now, again, typically speaking, this is again a client server architecture. Okay, I can see, I can really just simply call it a client. Just a sec. This one is my client, and this one is my server, and this one is my database here. We are still following the client server architecture, the three-tier landscape that we always have. But in this case, SAP has already provided the service layer to us embedded within their DB layer. Okay, so essentially this is how it is. Instead of having a different box, okay, outside the DB layer, we had everything inside my DB layer. Okay, now I don't have a server. All I had was a front end, and the service layer was itself embedded within the database layer. Now, one very easy thing to do here is that you go to your HANA DB, you create some XSJS or XSO data, you expose some OData directly from your HANA DB, and that OData you can directly use from your front end. Okay, which is very easy. As a developer, the first time I did it in 2016, I found it very easy. Okay, no need of any service layer, no need of any Java logic or Python logic. Very simple, no? But there is a drawback here. The drawback is that it's a security gap. Meaning, if I'm not if I'm not um sure about this, okay, or if I'm not watchful, I can simply expose all the data in my HANA DB to my front end. Okay, and since front end runs on JavaScript, okay, so I have seen cases where people have done this mistake. They are not careful enough, and they are exposing all their data from their HANA DB to the front end. So they themselves as application developers, they expose only one single table, but using access data, because I have that metadata, right? Metadata.xml. Using that metadata, I can look at what all entities I have exposed using OData and what is the structure of those entities. I can query as much as I want within that OData, right? So that power OData gives me. Now, since I was not careful as an application developer, I by mistake exposed everything from my database, which again is a security lapse. Okay, so in this case, the authorization flow or the authorization mechanism that typically is being used is your implicit grant. Like I said, this is an old paradigm. Okay, this is something which we used to do many years back. Okay, no one does that now. Okay, even SAP, although SAP still allows this thing, uh, in HANA 2.0 on Cloud Foundry, we call it XS Advanced instead of XS Classic. They have built in some more security features, more security controls. Although anyone who is not careful enough can still do the same mistake. Okay, that is still there. Similarly, you can always have your Gmail password as 1234. Okay, that's totally up to you, your mistake, right? But we have features, greater knowledge and greater awareness now not to do that. And again, the responsibility lies on us as application developers to secure our applications. Okay, I'll refer us back to that slide that I covered, the development aspects, where I called out that there are 6 development aspects. Okay, one of those aspects was your security. There you go. Okay, so this aspect is with us as application developers. We are responsible for securing our applications. All right, now I'll come back to this. Okay, so implicit grant needs no backend, just front end directly talking to our services, to our databases and whatnot. And it doesn't also need any client secret. Okay, typically speaking, since everything is working on browser on front end, we can actually see what is happening within the browser. Okay, browser nowadays, almost every browser has that developer tools feature. Okay, let me show it to you. See, security can be a hassle sometimes, but it is important. All right. Okay, application started. Yeah, now look at this. Uh, Although I know this is a very basic front end or a static application, but consider what I'm showing to you right now. Okay, so what I did was I right clicked on this page. I went to inspect. Okay, now what I can do is I can play around with this. Okay, essentially what I can do is I can go to this. Instead of this red color, I can say, okay, I don't really like this thing. I want to do green. Okay, I can really go ahead and do something on this side, although I'm not hacking into it. Okay, this is not called hacking. I'm not changing it for everyone. So if I give this link to all of you right now, okay, you will still see that red color. Okay, you will still see that red color. I'm just changing it on my own screen because I'm using my own browser on this, and everything is happening within the browser. So it remains with me. But the problem here is that I can go and see the source code. Okay, I can go really and see the source code here. That means so far it is okay. Okay, I have not written anything very secretive here. Okay, very sensitive here. But consider that if I have my client secret written here, or I have hard coded my user ID and password here. Okay, anyone can go right click, inspect, go to sources and find what I have written there. Okay, and normally when we look for some information on web pages, if it is not visually there, but we know that we can still find it using JavaScript or some CSS, I can really go inside this inspector, or this is called a developer tool. I can go inside developers tool and find it out. Okay, so this again is something, a feature which is given to us by the modern browsers. Okay, it was not there 10-12 years ago, but nowadays we have to be very careful. Okay, you really cannot have anything sensitive as part of your source code. That's why we have to have a backend for all the sensitive stuff. All right, I'm hoping I'm making myself clear here and there is no confusion here to anyone. Okay, if I, for example, another thing that I can, okay, let me show it to you here. Okay, again, now I've opened my uh, developers tool on my BTP cockpit page. Okay, now I'm going to logs. Okay, now see this, I am in my network tab right now. Okay, in this network tab, whatever network calls are happening from browser to any server, I can see those here. Okay, everything I can see here. Okay, I can see exactly what is happening. what kind of logs I am getting, right? Everything, all the data I am getting, all the requests I am passing to my server, everything I am seeing here. Okay, so this itself is a very powerful tool for developers, but again, it poses security risks if you are not careful when we are developing our applications. All right, so that is what I wanted to show. Now, that's why talking about implicit grant, we don't have a client secret, because since implicit grant doesn't have a backend associated, we can't really keep our client secret anymore. Okay, if we use it inside our JavaScript on front end, we are exposing it to everyone to use. Okay, any questions about implicit grant here? Okay, next is your client credentials flow. Okay, client credentials is also a very important and very well used flow of OAuth. If you follow this diagram, it says it needs front end. No. It needs user interaction. No. That means this flow I will use when I have a need of machine to machine or app to app communication. Okay, when I said in case of your IoT sensors example, if I have an IoT sensor which I want to talk to my server side on BTP, I will use this client credentials flow. Okay, it's again secure because it doesn't have a front end. Okay, it doesn't have any user interaction. Okay, so it is basically for cases where we want machines to interact with each other or applications to interact with each other. It has a client secret and all it has is a backend. Okay, so all machines, all applications essentially are backends. Okay, so we can also have a client secret and keep it secure. Okay, then is a password grant. Now password grant, at least based on this diagram, I can say it's as secure as auth code, but there is a very minute, but at the same time very significant difference between auth code flow and password grant flow. Okay, everything remains same. Everything remains same as auth code flow. The only difference that you will see is that in case of password grant, you as a user are not providing your user ID and password to the authorization server. Rather, you are providing that user ID and password to your to the application. But in case of password grant, the only difference is that you will put your user ID and password directly into your application, and your application will then pass on those user ID and password to the auth server. Okay, so the difference here is that you will have to implicitly trust your application that you are accessing with your user ID and password. Okay, you will have to trust them that they will not misuse it. They will not log it anywhere. Okay, they are not saving your user ID and password somewhere which they want to use elsewhere. Okay, so that's why while the password grant flow is same as auth code flow, it is not used anywhere. Okay, at least not anywhere productively, because it needs the users to trust the applications, which users don't, and also they should not. Okay, any questions with all these four flows before I then go deeper into auth code and client relations flow? No questions, guys? Is it all clear? Looks like you haven't had your breakfast yet, guys. Come on. Anything? Yes, no, nothing.
We could understood the concept that you're saying behind these four types of workflows. But
I'm sorry.
we'll get a so we could understand and we could hear you. So we could imagine what will happen and with these flows. But to get a good grip, so we will get on the implementation part. I think so.
All right, awesome. Now, next, I want to talk about Auth code flow grant.